And welcome to this video tutorial. My name is Lauren Kimball-Wachowski, and I'm going to be walking you through how to use Premiere Pro to compile a mock demo reel for ANI 273 Career Prep. To start out, this is kind of a little glimpse of what we're going to throw together right here. So let's get a little bigger. So we're going to talk about putting audio to a nameslate, this little fake nameslate, transition into rotation of a Jeep. It's got some text. It's got some text overlay. If we wind it a little, see a text overlay with some information. And it's just something really quick that we're going to throw together, and we might address a few other things, but in essence, just throwing together stuff for the mock reel. We'll go over how to do wireframe overlay and overlaying your ambient occlusion in a later tutorial. But for now, just stuff that pertains to the mock demo reel. So to begin, you need to open up Premiere Pro. You can download the license for a fee off of the Adobe website or do a 30-day free trial. There's a lot of discounts for students. I think it's $19 a month for students. When you open up Premiere Pro, this window pops up, this welcoming screen. I'm going to go ahead and click on New Project. Now with the New Project window, we've got the General tab and the Scratch Disk tabs. Everything in the General tab, as far as render, display formats, and capture formats, all of this stuff can be changed in project, so it's not permanent and it's not really all that important. Scratch Disk just tell you where all your in-program renders are going to go, and if you move your project file to another computer and you don't move the scratch disks, you can just choose to re-render. It doesn't really affect things. The bigger your project gets, the more you might want to hold on to those renders, though. I'll just let you know. Okay, if I start by naming the project, I'm just going to call it something like Kimball _ mock demo reel. And I'm going to go ahead and set its location to my desktop. Boom. And I'll press OK. The next thing that pops up is Premiere Pro itself, and when Premiere Pro is broken in into 4 windows, at least in this version, you can go up here and change the different layouts. Editing layout will work for what we want to do, because essentially we want to edit a mock reel. This first window here that's highlighted in blue, this is going to show you your source clip, which is anything that's been completely unedited. Premiere Pro is a non-destructive software, so anything that you do to the source material will be non-permanent. Any changes you make have to be exported as something new. It only alters within the program, so you don't have to worry about messing up your batch renders or your still images. They won't be permanently adjusted. Only within the software and the final export. Okay, so that source clip's going to show you whatever it is you brought into the program unaltered. This window over here will show you everything as you edit it, what it looks like as far as through the timeline. The timeline's down here. There's no sequence inside the timeline, so all the different timelines that actually show like the linear time strip, each one of those are organized into sequences. There are no sequences, which you can see right here, so the timeline is blank. To the left, bottom left-hand corner, we have the project window. Now the project window is where all of our materials are going to be stored, and to go ahead and start importing things, we can either go to File, Import, and open the window that way, or we can double-click the media bin. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and open up my demo files and bring in the Jeep render. So over here we have the Jeep's file as far as it being a Maya file. Over here we have its render, which is actually just a play blast of a low poly Jeep sitting on a rotating pedestal. I'm going to go ahead and click the first frame, and the moment that I do click that, down here toward the bottom of the screen you'll see the word image sequence, or the words image sequence with a little box. You can't click it just yet. When you grab that first frame, this becomes alive, and you can click it and press import, and it will treat it like an image sequence. Now, every sequence is different. It's going to have its own frame rate as far as your import settings. So by default, Premiere Pro wants to import everything at NTSC standard 29.97 flips per second. If you have a 2D animation that has to be imported at 24 flips per second, remember to right-click the footage and go to Modify. Under Modify, you've got Interpret Footage. And in the very first window, which is frame rate, you can go ahead and ask it to assume a separate frame rate, such as 24 clips per second, which will change the duration of the clip, and you just press OK. I don't want to do that in this instance, so I'm going to press Cancel, but that's really, really important to remember. You do not want something that plays at a different frame rate accidentally being imported as a default. That could mess up your final presentation. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is create a bin. So when you first import something, it'll often show up like this, which is a nice thumbnail view, which can be helpful, but the more assets that you bring into Premiere Pro, the more of a headache that's going to be, because you're going to end up with all these icons and you'll be grabbing the scroll down menu and looking through them, trying to find things. I like using the list view, so down here at the bottom left hand corner you can toggle between these two. You can also zoom in and zoom out using the same standard buttons that you're going to find in the other Adobe programs. Adobe likes to allow its users to kind of jump between software packages and maintain a good workflow, so they like to be consistent in their hotkeys and consistent in the buttons that they use. So you'll find these same buttons in like After Effects and Photoshop. By the way, if you hear a funny noise in the background, my dog's chewing on a rawhide, so I apologize for that. I hope that's not a distraction. I'm not even sure if you can hear it, but just throwing that out there. Okay, so sorry, I digress. Over here, on the right side of the project bin, you've got some more familiar buttons: the trash can, the new item, and a new bin. I'm going to click on new bin and I'm going to name it Jeep. Even though it seems kind of silly for this instance because we only have one item, why put it in a bin? Like I said, it's good to know how to organize your assets because over time it's going to become a lengthier process, and having them organized into bins is going to speed up your workflow. Alright, so everything that pertains to the Jeep is going to be in here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new sequence. So what I did was go down here, click on new item. It asked me if I want a sequence, offline file, blah 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 blah, all these different objects you can create inside Premiere Pro. Sequence is what we want to make, and this window pops up. Now a sequence, remember, is synonymous with timeline. So if you're asking for a new sequence, you're telling Premiere Pro what kind of timeline that you want to make. Now by default, it's got the digital video NTSC standard files. We're going to go ahead and minimize this, and we're going to go to HDV, high def digital video, and we're going to look at those settings because almost everything that you're going to do in animation is going to be at about a 16:9 ratio high definition. And because we're working with, smaller definition for the sake of, or smaller as far as like, we're not going to go to full 1080 because we only have a few weeks to do this demo reel. I mean, we're going to try to save as much time as we can. We're going to do the smaller ratio and go with 720. And they got 720-24, 725, 720-30. The difference here, 24 is dealing with animation, like 2D animation, where you're going to be doing 24 flips per second. 25 deals with PAL. So over in Europe, they use PAL as opposed to NTSC, and they have 25 flips per second. We're going to go with 30, which in North America, that's the NTSC standard broadcasting frames per second, sorry. Frames per second. And then I'm going to name my sequence something like Jeep, or actually, rather, mock demo reel. Mock demo reel. Press OK. So now I've got this sequence, and you'll notice that the moment I created this sequence, a timeline sort of appeared over in the timeline/sequence menu. And you'll see up here it says demo reel. If I created multiple sequences, they would appear like tabs around the top. Just like over here in the project bin, you've got media browser, libraries, info, other tabs. Different sequences can be tabbed over here, and you can actually put sequences within sequences, kind of like what you can do in After Effects. Actually, exactly like what you can do in After Effects. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start by creating a name title, because that would be a good thing to start with. You could create a custom name title by opening up Photoshop, and in fact you can create a live link between Photoshop and Premiere, so whatever you edit in Photoshop will show up immediately in Premiere. We're not going to go through all that. If you don't want to create a custom name slide in Photoshop, you can create it here in Premiere. Now in Photoshop, just as a quick tip, I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop real quick. If I wanted to create a name slide in Photoshop, give it a second to open. There we go. That was long. Okay. If I want to create a custom name slide in Photoshop, I could go File, New, and Document Type. I could actually go down and find Film and Video settings, and then choose my size, and you'll see that they've got HDV 720p, 30 flips per second. But not that the 29.97 actually matters in this instance, but when you do that in Photoshop, and here I'll go ahead and paint the screen the color so that you can see the guides. These are safe action and safe text, so whatever you create isn't cut off. So different screens have different screen ratios, and sometimes whatever you project gets cut off around the edges. To prevent that, that's why there are these barriers, as it were. And anything that you put toward the center is going to be 100% safe. So if you've got a big image render as your background, make sure that the most important stuff, your text and your name card, are here in the middle. And then you can save out whatever it is that you want to have there as your name slide. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this. And you could just import that into Premiere Pro. But for the sake of teaching, I'm just going to go ahead and create a custom name slide inside of Premiere Pro. I'm going to go press New, and I'm going to go ask for a title card. And it's going to ask me what settings I want. By default, it's going to be the settings that I'm working in, which is what I want. And I'm going to call it like my opening name slate, because your closing name slate might have different information. When I do that, and I can close out of this window if I want, that window that pops up is your title editing menu. Again, if you accidentally close out of it, you can just go over to your name slate and double click it. Now I'm going to create a bin real quick just because I like staying organized, and it's going to be like demo reel files. So these are files that pertain to the demo reel like as a whole instead of the individual assets. So I'm going to put the mock demo reel sequence and the opening slate inside that folder. Then I'm going to double click the name slate and get to work on that. So you've got, just like in Photoshop, it creates that save action, save text guides to keep you from accidentally getting any pertinent information cropped off your screen. I'm going to click on the text tool. A lot of these tools, again, they work just like you'd see in Photoshop, just like you'd see in After Effects. I'm going to create a box, text box, and I can start typing something like Lauren Kimball Epic Demo Reel 2016 5D graphics. I don't know, I'm just being silly. If I select everything, which you can either just click and grab, or you can press Control A, and you can ask the program to center your text. You can go over here and you can adjust the scale. You can use this button up here, which is your selection tool, which is always going to be the V key, but sometimes when you select V key and you've got your text box open, it'll just type V. So sometimes it's better to just grab the buttons. And anywhere that you place it in this box is how it's going to appear on the screen. So I'm going to exit out of this, and I'm going to grab that name slate, and I'm going to drag it to the timeline. Okay? Boom. There it is on the screen. If I double click it here in the bin, then I can see how anything I do here changes it on the screen. And I can adjust this. I'm not limited to just creating giant text that centers on the screen. I can also go in and choose a custom font that I want. They also have custom styles so that you don't have to like fuss around. They have pre-made styles that you just use whatever works for you. Maybe you want something to be smaller on the lower corner of the screen. I wouldn't recommend this because that's really hard to read. Remember that whatever you make on the demo reel, you want it to be able to read from a distance. So anything that I do inside this text window will be applied to how it looks on the screen. Now I'm going to bring in a still image of some nature. I'm going to double click here, That'll work. Yeah, so I'll just pretend this is a piece of my art, and it's not, but it's funny. I'm going to stick that in the timeline. Notice I can layer things in the timeline. I'm going to click on this image that I have selected, and now I want to move this so that it's off to the side. Like if this were a drawing that I did, it's not, but if it was, then I would maybe want to place it on my name slide. Remember that some name slides utilize that negative space for showing off something, like maybe a life drawing or maybe a render that you really like, just something. And you can go ahead and do that by layering it here inside of the timeline. Now, just like in Photoshop, these layers are organized so that whatever's on top is going to be on top here, and vice versa. So if I were to take this video clip and like this one here and move it up into like this upper channel, you'll notice the text is now on top of the image. It doesn't matter because I'm going to be moving this image around. So to move the image itself, I'm going to double click on it here, and you'll see that it shows up in the source image, exactly, unedited, unmessed with. Off to the left of the source image preview, we have a tab called your effects control. And your effects control is kind of like if you're in After Effects and you unspool an asset and you want to change its opacity or its transformation values. All of that can be done inside your effects control. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click on the motion box. When I select that, a transformation box appears and kind of allows me to move the asset around the screen. I can unspool it and actually go in and scale and enter in values manually here. But like, let's say that's the art that I want to show off, and there's my name slide. Okay? Alright, so I can also keyframe, which can be helpful if you wanted to have a render suddenly shrink so that you can move stuff in the negative. What you would do is you would unspool something, like let's say I wanted this image to slowly shrink. I don't know why you'd want it to, but let's say you did. Okay? So I'm going to grab over here to the right. This is the timeline. It's like a mini window of the timeline, only this timeline is going to show you keyframes that you applied to assets. So if I move it here in the timeline, you'll see it move here. In the preview window, you'll see it move here inside the effects control. All three of them are linked. I'm going to go ahead and rewind this to the beginning, and I'm going to click on this little stopwatch icon right next to scale. The moment I do that, I start creating keyframes. Okay? So right next to scale, you have your values, and next to values, you have this little kind of circle with arrows next to it. That adds and removes keyframes. Okay? So I have a keyframe, and you'll notice. You'll notice right here, it's kind of hard to see, but if I click on this, it appears and reappears. That's adding and deleting a keyframe. I'm going to move forward in the timeline, and I'm going to do something like shrink this image. And when I do, you'll notice a new keyframe is made. I can toggle between those keyframes using these arrows, and when I press play, you'll see that the image is keying the way that I want it to. Alright? So that's really, really basic, and I don't want to go in much further than that right now. Okay, so now we have a title card and we've got a little bit of animation. Let's go ahead and pull in the Jeep. I'm going to go over here, I'm going to grab the Jeep image sequence, and I'm going to drag it into the timeline. Boom. I'm going to zoom in. The zoom bar down here is just like it is in other Adobe softwares. I'm going to go ahead and press play real quick and see what I've got so far. And it suddenly jumps to this render. Now the render is really, really itty bitty. So I'm going to double click it. There it is its source. Right next to the source is the effects control. I'm going to unspool it, and I'm going to up its scale. Okay. Now, this is a really choppy transition between the Jeep and my opening slide. So one of the first things that I might want to change here is have a softer transition. Actually, before I do that, I think I want to address repeating animations like this turntable. Now in Premiere, I could just grab this Jeep and repeat it over and over again. Boom, boom. And now I've got the Jeep playing 3 times in my timeline. Obviously, I'd have to go through and change the effects on each one, but that's kind of a pain in the butt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all 3 of these, and I'm going to create a new sequence based on this Jeep file. How I'm going to do that is I'm going to grab this Jeep, and I'm going to drag it over here onto the new icon. And when I do that, it creates a new sequence called Jeep 001. It's going to be named right after my file, and it is set to the same aspect ratio as my clip. Okay, so all the settings that came with this source clip, the sequence is going to match it. So unlike the demo reel main sequence right here, it's going to fit perfectly. It's a different aspect ratio. So why I did this is because I want to go ahead and loop the Jeep inside this sequence so that any changes that I make to this sequence will apply to everything in the sequence. Here, I'll show you so that it makes a little bit more sense. I'm going to repeat the animation a few times in this sequence, like maybe 5 times. So if I press play, we see the turntable of the Jeep kind of going around and around and around, and it repeats, which is what we want. Then I'm going to go to mock demo reel, and instead of grabbing this Jeep image sequence, I'm going to grab the sequence that we made. So not the little animation, but the sequence that animation lives in. I'm going to grab it and drag it into the timeline. Now by default, it's got audio and effects channels. You can just ignore those. I could go over into this sequence and actually ask these audio sequences to disappear, so I can go delete tracks, delete all empty audio tracks. It's going to by default keep 1. But if you find this distracting, like every time I select this, the fact that there's an empty audio track bothers you, you can right click and you can, let's see, where is it? Unlink. Boom. And now the video is separate from the audio and you can delete the audio. Okay? Alright, so now you see that we've got our little title card and it transitions into a Jeep turntable. Cool. I'm going to grab this Jeep turntable and go into the effects controls, go into motion and scale that up. This is the strength of doing it this way as opposed to repeating. Because if we had just dragged and dropped the animation in over and over again into the original sequence, we would have had to go in and change the effects controls for each one of those renditions of the animation. And this is way more streamlined, having this nice clean this nice clean image bar that we can just grab and shrink and expand as far as the length. Like if we decide we don't want this rotation to last for more than 16 seconds, boom, I can grab the end of this and drag it down so that it ends right at 16 seconds. Now another tool that's helpful, throughout all of this we've used the selection tool, which is V. V is the hotkey for your selection tool. You can also use C, which is a cut tool. I could cut right here, go back to my V key, and delete that second section. And I can always bring it back because Premiere Pro is very user-friendly and also very content-friendly. It's not going to permanently damage anything. You can kind of relax and experiment and not be afraid of permanently destroying something. Okay? So now I've got this little name title, and the same is true with the name title. If you're going to do something crazy elaborate, you might want to put the name title in its own sequence. Alright, so boom, it transitions into the turntable. Maybe I want something a little less drastic. Maybe instead of having this like suddenly drop into the turntable, I want it to crossfade. Okay, so talking about crossfades, I'm going to go over to where my project bin is, and next to it you've got Media Browser, which, you don't actually have to have this open. You can close that panel, you can close the library, you can close the info. Effects. Markers are used for if you're going to bounce something out of Premiere Pro and put it into Encore. That'll help you put in DVD markers. I don't want those. I'm going to close that panel. And then history. Really, these are the only 3 panels you need for this particular setup. We're dealing with your project bin, your effects bin, your history. Under effects, you've got all sorts of options. You've got video effects, audio effects, video transitions. Now, if you want to get it out of your system and play with all these different transitions like barn doors and page peels, have at it. Professionally, you're really only going to ever use cross dissolve. Under the dissolve folder, you've got cross dissolve. I'm going to grab it and drop it here. When I do that, I press play. Turns into a nice cross dissolve. Now there's some issues with that cross dissolve. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. One is that this up here isn't dissolving. This image that's on its own layer wasn't dissolving. Because these are 2 separate layers, anything that I do to this bottom layer has to be done to the top layer. I think what would be easier, first off, if I want to do a perfect crossfade between my opening slide and my Jeep, I would probably want to put this slide in its own sequence. That way I don't have to fuss with making sure every layer has everything that I want. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the Jeep off to the side a little, and I'm going to do dip to black. Dip to black here, dip to black here, so both the top and the bottom, both the top and the bottom assets dip to black, like that. And then I'm going to cross dissolve my Jeep into the scene. Maybe hug it back over, so there's no gap. There we go. So I'm going to press play. There, so it's a little more seamless. Maybe you want a jump cut where it's a little bit more, boom, it appears. But if you want to cross dissolve, you can just grab these transitions, drop them in. You can actually click on the transitions and they'll appear in the effects control window so that you can customize how fast and how slow this happens. You can also grab it in the timeline and shrink it and expand it, but I just leave it at its defaults. That way it doesn't get overcomplicated. Just letting you know that you can do this. Alright, so next we're going to talk about custom text overlaying something. So back into my project bin, I'm going to press new, and I'm going to go to title again, and this time I'm going to say Jeep _ text and press OK. So what's really cool is whatever you have the little timeline navigator on is what's going to show on the screen. So if I want to see exactly where everything is that I'm going to overlay text on, that's a really helpful feature in Premiere. Alright, I'm going to create a text box, and maybe I'll leave it up here in the upper right hand corner, and I'll say something like Jeep 200 faces. Grab all my text and definitely want to shrink it down. It's more than 200 faces. We'll just say 2,000. I actually don't know how many faces this Jeep is. It's been a really long time since I worked on it. Phrases. I can spell. There we go. Maybe make it even smaller. I don't know. 25. Might make it a different color. I can go over here to color. Over here on the right, you've got title properties. And I'm going to go ahead and make it black. Yeah, that seems to read well. Go ahead and orient it to the right. Maybe I want to say something like Maya 2015. I don't know how many hours it took, or maybe if I used Marmoset for the render. I obviously didn't. It's a Play Blast, but it's just an example of what you can put. Exit out of this, grab the Jeep text, overlay it here, boom. Now, again, we got that little problem where the crossfade seems to work because this is already black, but if it were white font, it would just appear. It's because there is no cross dissolve applied to this Jeep text. How I would delete that, go to the Jeep, and actually put the text inside of the sequence. Why is that not showing up, I wonder? Huh. Oh, that's because it's a different ratio. My bad. That's not going to work. Yeah, we're going to have to keep it here. But that's okay. You can just remember to cross dissolve it in. You can also move it. I could cut right here if I wanted more information added in later. I could go to my effects window, do a little cross dissolve or dip to black. That way, if I want this font to disappear over time, ooh, I did that to everything. Oh, instead of dip to black, let's do cross dissolve so it doesn't affect the Jeep underneath it. Alright, now it fades away, which is kind of cool if I want that. So this is essentially the skill sets that you need to know to basically throw together your mock demo reel. Other things you could do is I could click on the sequence. I could add in some keyframes if I wanted to. Keyframe the position and the scale. Move forward a little bit in the timeline. Maybe I want to scale this down and move it off to the right. And now when I play my animation, and then I could bring in some things into the negative space because I keyframed over here. If I decide I didn't like any of the changes I made, I can always turn off these stopwatches. Now it's going to tell you right now that it will delete all keyframes. Yep, I want it to delete all my keyframes, and now it doesn't do that anymore. This just gives you the flexibility to move assets around in your timeline, how they appear on the screen, so that you can show off more. Okay, so I obviously want to put a name title at the end of my reel, so maybe just grab that opening name slate again, maybe bring in that picture again if I feel so inclined. Obviously that name slide is way too big, or that image is way too big, so I'm going to shrink it. I probably wouldn't want to use the same image. If I want the same image properties, I would put this together in its own sequence, or go over here, press Control C, and paste it. Boom. Ah! Make sure that you have the right time layer in your timeline selected. It is not listening to me very well. There. Drop it there. There. Now the same thing that I copied and pasted before in the timeline can appear here at the ending. So yeah, just if you found that kind of confusing, then forget about it, because my saying is if it's helpful, keep it. If it's not, then don't let it mess you up. All right. So now I've got a beginning slide and an ending slide. I want to add some music. So I'm going to double click my mock demo reel bin, go to demo reel files, there's a little sound wave, I'm going to import it, there's my audio, it's kind of longer than my audio, so maybe I'll shrink everything down so that it fits. Boom. Use my cut tool. Boom. So now I've got this. It's very silly. 10 seconds, but it works for a demonstration. Alright, if you want to export something, you go to File, Export, Media. Inside Export Media, you want to go to QuickTime Settings. Alright, now over here on the left, it shows you the source footage, so how it looks originally, versus your output settings. Okay, so if I were to go to NTSC DV24 flips, so that it's more of a square ratio with different size pixels, there's the source, but the output looks different. So I'm going to go back to widescreen. Okay. And I'm going to scroll down. Over here you've got effects options, video options, audio, captions, publish. Don't change anything, really. You could change the codec to H.264 to make it a little bit smaller, but you really don't want to mess around with a whole lot of different things because you can mess up how it plays. The width is 720 by 480 in this export setting, which is fine. If you want to make it smaller, you can. Ooh, where is it on set 24 flips? Why is that? Let me go back. QuickTime. HD7, oh, weird. Okay, so it only gives me the option of doing it 24 frame rate. I would definitely change that to 29.97. So this would be optimal, I think, for exporting it high def, would be to set it to the HD 720p, go ahead and up the quality to 100, and change the frame rate to 29.97. That's fine. You can change those things. But I wouldn't change anything else for your final export. For sake of making it small for a mock demo reel being dropped in the Dropbox, oops, didn't mean to push that, H.264, go ahead and change the width ratio to something smaller if you want, like, I don't know, 630 for example. Make it uber tiny. Doesn't matter to me. And definitely make sure that it's set to 29.97. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and go back up to the top. They've got output name. I'm going to click it. I can say maybe this is version 1 or something. Press save. And now queue versus export. Queue is if you have lots of different renderers. If you were working on a project and let's say you've got several scenes that are going to go into a mass composite, you can queue each render and it will queue in a list, and then you can just walk away from the computer as the computer renders all these things. For this instance, we're only rendering one file that's 10 seconds long, so instead of pressing Q, we're going to want to press export. Press export, doodle-doodle-doo. Okay, going to minimize the screen. There on my desktop is my mock demo reel. I open with preview, and there's my done. And then you can put that in the Dropbox. Alright, so I hope that was a helpful introduction into using Premiere Pro. Premiere Pro and After Effects, you could put everything together in After Effects, but what you'll find in Premiere Pro is that it's more catered to video editing as opposed to After Effects. After Effects is more for post work, like color correction and keying out green screens and putting in effects. Premiere Pro and After Effects can actually be hot linked together, so any changes you make inside of Premiere Pro will be altered directly in After Effects if you have the two programs open simultaneously. It's really, really cool. Eats up your RAM, but that's okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me at lkimball2@jccc.edu, and have a great day.